If you are single and sober and ever wonder if a thriving love relationship is even possible, you're going to love to meet my next guest. Her name is Louie Bischoff. She's the founder of the SOBER Relationship Blueprint, which offers online dating and relationship coaching for single people who are sober from drugs, alcohol, food, gambling, and sex addiction. In 2009, she had a 20-year marriage that came to an end. She used alcohol to cope with the sadness, grief, and depression. She grew up in a domestically violent household where any type of feeling of emotion, whether positive or negative, was met with shame, anger, and violence. So turning to alcohol at the end of her own relationship seemed like an easy way to numb out through this challenging time. Her divorce was finalized in 2010 when her sons were 6 and 8 years old. Then in July 2012, Louie realized that alcohol was ruling her life and that she was neglecting her kids then, 8 and 10. By doing personal growth with professionals, other people in recovery, and by continuing to put herself out there in the dating environment, she began pulling all her notes, thoughts, and ideas together and came up with the framework of what is now known as the SOBER Relationship Blueprint. Today, she's a successful entrepreneur, a great mother to her young adult sons, and an advocate for sober living. So tune in for her personal story. Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stepanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. Meet Louie Bischoff. She's the founder of the SOBER Relationship Blueprint, which offers online dating and relationship coaching for single people who are sober from drugs, alcohol, food, gambling, and sex addiction. She's going to share her personal story. I'm excited about this for listeners because this is the first time we've had someone on that talks about relationships, which are really in question when you become sober, because sober is is such a social, this is how we get started in relationships, So you're going to bring another perspective. I'm so excited to hear your personal story. So welcome to the show, Louie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy to be here and such a pleasure to be your guest. And thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to be able to be here and also share my story, but also be able to help other people too. That's certainly what I've recognized, that the more that I'm able to share more things, the more that people are like, me too, me too, me too. So it's just a wonderful place to be. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you could just start from we want to hear your personal story and then lead us all the way up to how you got to do it with what you're doing today to serve other people in this area.
Yeah, great question. As you mentioned, and thank you for the intro on that as well. As you mentioned, I'm the founder of the SOBER Relationship Blueprint. And the SOBER Relationship Blueprint, and that's where I'll end up also. But the SOBER Relationship Blueprint is set up specifically in 5 different modules using the word sober, SOBER, and each one of the letters of the word sober is an area of learning. And I got to those areas of learning my own experience of being single and sober after my marriage ended. So a little bit about my story is I didn't drink alcoholically for very long. I drank regularly as a gentleman, as they say, so to speak, as the book says, as the big book says. Why can't he learn how to drink like a gentleman? Well, I guess I was a gentle lady. But the aspect about that is that I could see the end of my marriage coming down the road, so to speak. And that's when I started drinking alcoholically. So it was about for 3 years. And I'm not minimizing my experience at all, and it's not a competition, but that's just my story. And the reason why that I was drinking alcoholically for me, I mean, I know that I'm an alcoholic, but the reason why is because I was in the pain, because my marriage was ending. I was in my marriage, my relationship with my former husband for almost 20 years. And I could
Wow.
see that it was coming, and I didn't have, as the word is said, is a maladaptive coping skill, right? Coping tool.
Hmm.
I was using alcohol to numb out, to ease the pain and the grief and the just the loss of the
Sure.
relationship ending. And for the record, I was the one who ended my marriage. It just ended. It wasn't because of my drinking. It wasn't because of other people. It wasn't because of money. It was because we just got to that point where it just wasn't getting better, and it just
Hmm.
kept not getting better. So I just was, like I said, sad. And that was the tool that I was using. At that time, when I ended the marriage, when the marriage ended, it was actually now a long time ago in 2010. My sons were 6 and 8. And as I said, I was drinking alcoholically. I continued to drink alcoholically after the divorce into early divorce time, and finally walked into, for me, the 12 steps of work. I know that's not for everyone, but for me, that's what I did.
Hmm.
And it was in 2012. And at the time, my kids were 8 and 10. So that's a little bit about just kind of the super surface level regarding my drinking and what it looked like. But let me just kind of fill in a little bit of a backstory. I grew up and I'm the oldest of 3 kids. My parents were self-employed, so they were very attentive to building the business. And I grew up in a domestic violence household. So there was constant, of course, constant violence, but also constant instability, no certainty. Because a combination, like I said, because they were self-employed and building a business, so there was a lot. It was just work was number one value, work was number two value, work was number three value, work was number four value, and the aspect around family didn't come till like maybe number 100 in the values that I
Hmm.
saw. So, without having the direction of learning about comfort or learning about feelings or learning about safety or seeing boundaries respected, not any of those things. And in my household, we were punished for having any kind of feelings. So I had no feelings. So it wasn't just like bad feelings, like you'd be crying and the proverbial, oh, why are you crying? I'll give you something to cry about. It was
Right.
also like, oh, I got a little gold star on my spelling bee. Like, well, who do you think you are? You think you're someone special? I'm like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I guess
Mm-hmm.
not. So as I became more of an adult, and came into like being a teenager in high school, I didn't know boundaries. I didn't know. I just saw tons of caretaking. I was a huge caretaker in the family because my parents were working, building their business. So I was taking care of my brothers. I got rewarded, like, oh, thank you so much for helping. Good job. Having to try and caretake around the violence, trying to minimize, trying to take the violence for myself versus my younger brothers. So as I
Mm-hmm.
came into teendom, those aspects about being a people pleaser, trying to eliminate strife, working as hard as I could to control situations, just continued I mean, get strengthened. And that's how I started to show up as an adult, and just not knowing how to have boundaries, being involved with relationships, sexual relationships, simultaneously being in a committed relationship, but having side relationships. Because again, I'm not saying like I'm a bad person. I just didn't know how to have boundaries. I felt like I
Sure.
had no worth. I was
Mm-hmm.
always seeking the external validation because internally I didn't have any worth. I didn't have any validation. And that
Right.
pattern is my pattern for life
Mm-hmm.
until now. So when I started, just a few minutes ago, communicating and sharing with you about like, oh, I didn't drink alcoholically for very long, that is true. But the pattern of not being a healthy, mature adult is where I went through and how I went through all of my adult life from early teendom, from 13, right? From 13 until 43 when I walked into AA. And it was in the 12 steps. And again, it just worked for me, but it was the aspect about starting to show up and learn how to be a better mother, how to be a better sister, how to be a better worker, how to be a better leader, how to be a better daughter. I had to learn those things. I thought I knew them,
Uh, yeah.
but I had to learn those things. And then just being single and dating, and then just develop the sober relationship blueprint and being able to be out there helping people to learn how to date sober, be single and sober, and have relationships. So it's a little bit of my story.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. When you were speaking, I thought of the phrase, health attracts health. So if that's true, then unhealthy attracts unhealthy. So, having that period of time where, you weren't, and having side relationships and just not knowing, and I think that might be true for a lot of people, as we come into our adulthood or our 20s and 30s. My 20s were, navigation of like, where did I go? Like, who am, and then when we come into later 20s and 30s, we start looking internally. And I think what's really good about what you said, I know not everybody is for the 12 steps, but I know that program structure really takes everybody out of the picture. Like, the blame game is over, and we're just looking at like being responsible for who we are, which is the good news, because we can only change ourselves, which is essentially what you did. And, socializing in a drinking world is a lot easier, right? Especially with matters of the heart, because it kind of gives you that liquid courage to just go out and be. But I think in sobriety, if you do struggle with the isms and the alcoholism, in sobriety, wow, those relationships really can be powerful, meaningful, and really long lasting. So thank you for sharing your personal story, but what would be some advice to give to like step out there in a way that, you still maintain yourself, do the work first and then step out, or just kind of like learn who you are? Like, how do you do that if you're just getting sober?
Yeah.
How'd you do it?
Yeah. Oh, I love
It's
the question.
loaded. It's a loaded question.
Yeah. Oh, it's just super easy. No, it's not easy. Great question. So what I heard you ask is basically, how do you get started? The adult world is very focused, as we know, as you mentioned, focused on alcohol. And how do I start to get out there and have relationships, and what does it look like? And I appreciate what you said earlier, right? Is that healthy attracts healthy, and vice versa. I use the phrasing also, water seeks its own level. So when I'm at a low water level, right, I'm going to be seeking more low water aspects. And when I'm at a higher water level, I'm going to be looking for that higher water direction too. So it is true. And that's been my experience. So how to get started? That's a really great question. I've worked with a lot of people, and where I find the stumbling block is, and it takes time and we work together, is the concept of, I'll say it this way. I always start off when I'm working with my clients of saying that life is a documentary. It's not a Disney movie. And so what I mean by that is that so much of our concepts, it's just information. So much of our concepts around relationships and romantic relationships, I'll speak to directly, are conceived from a Disney thought process, of a fall in love, happily ever after. There is one person, this kind of fantasy thinking. And when I work with people, I begin working with people, as I said, I start with that little snippet, that little phrase about, right, life is a documentary movie, not a Disney movie. And let's sit down and unpack that a little bit. And when my experience is that it actually is yes and, So yes, keep working on yourself. Yes, keep doing the things that you need to be doing, whether it's working with professionals, whether it's working with a sober coach, whether it's doing 12-step recovery, whether it's whatever it is that you're doing for yourself to grow yourself and be able to start moving forward. For me, when I started dating, I was not dating at all. And this is what I say is I was not dating to get into a relationship. I was dating to see if I could begin to change my behavior. If if the man that I'm a heterosexual female, if the man that I was on a date with wanted to see me again, but I didn't like him and I wasn't interested, did I have enough self-esteem? Did I have enough self-confidence? Did I have enough courage to
Mm-hmm.
say, thank you, I appreciate you saying that, but this is not a fit for me? Because
Mm-hmm.
as I mentioned about in my story, like I was groomed to be a people pleaser, right?
Sure.
Because there was a direct effect if things were amiss at the house growing up. So what are these things that I can do? Well, it's okay, I'm unhappy, I just need to make sure the house is okay or the kitchen's cleaned up so that I don't get beat up, or my mom doesn't get beat up, or my brothers don't get, or so there's more comfort or stability, right, or safety. And so, okay, so many times I can't even, right, it was like, oh, in my college days or after whatever, like, oh, I really like you, Louie, I really like you, but I'm like, I don't really like him, but okay, he likes
Right.
me, okay. Oh, so I go out on a date and somebody says, oh, can I give you a kiss? I'm like, mm, I don't
No.
like him, I don't want him to kiss me.
Right.
Like, that does not sound appealing. Like,
Right.
no, that's not gonna be comfortable for me. Wait, what? Like, who said that? And like, I mean,
Right.
no, I could, but I couldn't. And that's how I started dating, Jessica, was just being
Like
able to just,
practice.
yeah, like an experiment, my own data point
Sure.
of one social experiment. Okay, how about this? Okay, how about this? So when I work with my clients, there's only one thing I say is, do you want to only go on one more date with this person? That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Not do I want to get in a relationship, not do I want to have kids, not do I want to, like, is this person going to support my recovery? None of that, because that's all fantasy thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes me out of being present. So when I'm in that position of being able to sit in that seat on the date or go walking or go for, bike riding, whatever that date looks like, I'm only looking at it with the filter of, do I want to talk to this person one more time? And the
Wow,
answer
that's
is no.
great.
If the answer is no, that's totally fine.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely. And that's okay.
Yes. Yeah, and I love you brought up the word self-esteem, and I think in getting sober, it's a rebuild for sure. From whatever background you come from, it's a definite rebuild. And with an increase in self-esteem also comes an increase in self-respect. But I love what you're saying because it's a small step. It's like a practice, and it's keeping it on you and what you view as being okay to go further, and then having the courage to voice that and to see the response, and like regardless of what it is, be okay with it, and then kind of come back and talk to your people and try and do it again, because that's ultimately like how you rebuild and start to change, right? So that's essentially how you're doing this coaching, I would imagine. And you did it yourself, you built it out of self experience. Yeah.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about the importance of self esteem and how it correlates with self respect in the early days of getting back out there and being sober.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So love that. Love that. So the question is, right, about basically what's the importance of self-esteem? Well,
Mhm.
I'm just going to talk about sober relationship blueprint for 1 second, because
Okay.
sober relationship blueprint, as I mentioned, each letter of the word sober is an area of learning. And it's not accidental on the way that the letters are arranged, or excuse me, the words in the letters. So the S is for self-esteem. And the O is for openness, the B is for boundaries, the E is evolving into other intimacies beyond sexual intimacy. And then the R is for readiness. So when I set up like you said, exactly, it was from all my own experience. When I set up the sober relationship blueprint, I knew the S had to be around self-esteem, because I can't go forward with anything else without building up that confidence, the self-esteem, that belief, even if it's a little tiny baby belief, that I am enough and that I'm worthy. And then the O is about being open to new things, like, oh, I only date this type of guy. I only have this type of girlfriend. Yeah, but what if you don't? What if it's, as you said, it's a rebuild? Let's be open, and then creating those boundaries with the B. So the reason why I wanted to say that, and getting back to your question, is because for me, and what you said, is that it does have to start with self-esteem, but it's not just wave a magic wand and now you have self-esteem. Because in my experience and my understanding is that it all is internal.
Sure.
So I'm sharing about, I'm looking for that exterior, right? That external validation for myself, because internal, I don't feel enough. I don't feel valuable. I don't feel worthy. I don't inside.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I build that up? So with self-worth, when I started dating, I mean, I had a sponsor, 12-step sponsor, and that was helping, but I didn't have a dating coach. So when I work with my clients, right, we're specifically targeting on these things. So working together with mindset of the I ams or affirmations, like I am worthy, I am valuable, even though that sounds silly, but it's actually really valuable to continue to change the thought process, the neuro processes. And in my experience, having self-worth, having self-confidence, having self-esteem allows me to begin to sit still and listen to really what I really want, what I really need. What does that look like? How do I verbalize my wants and needs and my boundaries and keep those boundaries? Like early on when I started dating, I would like, oh, I've got a boundary. Like I was just sharing, like, oh, somebody wanted to kiss me and I didn't want to kiss him. Okay, I don't want to kiss you, and there's my boundary. And then 30 seconds later, I'm like, boundary? What boundary? Like, here's me making out with the person in the parking lot because I verbalized it, but I didn't keep the boundary.
Right.
So these are all my own personal growth. Right? I'm
Yeah.
not wrong with me. I'm not a bad person. These are just the things I had to learn, and that I recognize other people need to learn too if they want to.
Sure. Yeah. It makes me think about, I remember early on, because we talk a lot about, self-evolvement, but then too, I think what goes hand in hand with growing internally and spiritually or otherwise, you have a value on how the other person feels as well. So whereas before you talked about kissing someone you really didn't want to kiss, so there you're giving them the false hope that there's something that's going to happen in the future, or there's a relationship that's going to come from this, when internally you know that's not going to happen. And at some point you have enough self-worth upon yourself, but you also have enough like respect for other people to not do that anymore, to not let somebody hang on where, you don't give false hope, because that's not what you're about. So it's not only like a respect for you and to end it when it's supposed to be ended, but it also allows the other person to move on to be in the truth of where you're really at, so that they can say, oh, okay, then she's not really for me and I'm going to have to move on. So it gives them that grace too, as you give yourself that practice of being able. And I think another thing that we could talk about, if you don't mind, is they talk about in early sobriety, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And so when we do things differently, like if you say, yeah, I had a great time, but yeah, I don't want to do this again for next time. That may be severely uncomfortable for people to voice their truth, right? But what comes, tell us what happens on the other side if you really allow yourself to be uncomfortable, to hear yourself say that and to be like, oh my God, was that me? Did I say that? But when you get home, how does that feel if it's the truth? Because the truth is hard, but it's necessary if you want to get healthy. So what's it like when you get home after speaking your mind and, it's a success, right?
Yeah, over time the perception becomes that it's a success, right? But as you're saying,
Mhm.
in the moment, because it's a different behavior, it feels really uncomfortable. And
Sure.
what you were just saying, Jessica, reminds me of what one of the Brene Brown sayings, right? Clear is kind. And when I'm working with my clients and even for myself, I just hold on to those three words because clear is kind. For me, this
Mhm.
alcoholic, this addict, this person over here who's been in active addiction before, this person knows how to lie. I know how to live a double life. I know what that looked like. I know the lying, the manipulation, the way that I just move through my life by
Mhm.
having the double life all the time, the amount of energy it took to do all of those things, right? To do the lies, to live the lies, to say the lies, to do the manipulation, to do all the hiding. And so clear is kind. And as I've gotten more sober, is that I move away from the lying, from the deception, and like you're saying, leading people on.
Mhm.
Now I can recognize that, when I'm communicating with someone, when I'm going on a date with someone, or when I'm even working with someone or a client, I can recognize that exterior thing, that person is triggering my addict or triggering the codependent or triggering that
Mhm.
intensity that I used to seek out at being in active addiction. And now I can recognize that. So going back to what you were saying regarding being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's all new, right?
Sure.
As you were saying, is that getting sober is having to rebuild, and
Mhm.
because the previous Louie or the previous anybody, right? This is what I'm used to, or I'm used to the chaos, or I'm used to the codependency. I'm used to uh, sleeping with people I don't want to. This is my pattern that I'm used to, but I want to change the pattern. And the only way I can change the pattern, right? If nothing changes, nothing changes. The
Mhm.
only way I can change is that I change it. And in my experience, having other people around me or me being of support to other people really continues to fortify that change and that
Yes.
discomfort. I remember a couple of years ago that when I was going on lots of first dates, and I was in a recovery meeting, and I was saying, and I sat there and it was my turn to share, and I said, you guys, if I did not know that I'm doing the right thing
Mhm.
by going on so many first dates, I would think that I'm doing the wrong thing. Like, what's wrong with me? I keep going on first dates. Like, why can't I, find some, or like, what's wrong? Why not, just kind of like that mental
Sure.
gymnastics, what's not helping me, but knowing like going on multiple first dates is actually positive because it's eliminating what I
Mhm.
don't want, but it's uncomfortable, like you're saying, and continuing to be in the discomfort. And then, as you said, when I get home, I'm like, oh, wow, cool. I did that. Who
Yeah.
knew?
That's great. And I think a lot about percentages when I think of early sobriety and matters of the heart, right? Because we tend to, if you're in a relationship or you have an interest, um, it takes up a lot of your mind space and it takes up a lot of, your day. And it's like an 80-20, 80% the relationship, 20% of what we're supposed to be doing, and when we keep it on ourselves, which is essentially what you're talking about, is it really can shift that to 80-20, like where 20 can be the relationship and 80 can be on how we're reacting to it, or how we're fitting it into our life instead of making it our entire life. And I think that's so important because it's like you talked about the mental gymnastics, and like it's a big energy drain and a lot of exhaustion to live the previous Jessica or the previous Louie, right? It's just a lot of figuring out stuff that we don't have to, or being responsible for people we don't have to be responsible for, and their feelings and actions and such. And when we write ourselves, it like gives us that energy back to kind of just be us and to focus on what we're supposed to be focusing on. But then to kind of give that 20%, like, yeah, we're going to go out there again, or sure, I'd like to go out again, but it's not going to be consuming your life because you're like rebuilding internally yourself, and it's not about everybody and everyone else's feelings, which, go with people pleasing and a lot of the isms that come with being an alcoholic actively or growing up in an environment that wasn't quite healthy. So, wow, there's a lot of good there. It's like balances it out almost.
Yeah, thank you. And just wanted to touch back on, I know that you and I may have, some time under our belts for being
Mm-hmm.
sober.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have your listeners think like this is easy. I just can only speak for my own journey. Like it's still one day at a time. And I don't mean one day at a time that I'm not going to pick up alcohol or drink or do other things I don't need to be doing. It's one day at a time of just moving through today and just life just for me. And so early in sobriety and getting back into that aspect around social alcohol and what that looks like,
Mm-hmm.
it is being able to, like, for example, work with me or work with someone or even with a sponsor or guide or a mentor, having someone on your side in your corner that can guide you through these new things, right? Through that discomfort,
Sure.
through the like, how do I put this on my dating profile that I don't drink? Do I put on my dating profile? Like, how do I tell them right away? And one of the things, the
Yeah.
biggest thing I've learned is that people have to earn the right to hear my story. And so that it's not this false sense of vulnerability when I go out on date number one of like, let me tell you all about this trauma in my life.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's that they
Mm-hmm.
have to earn the right. I didn't know that because I didn't have any belief that I had boundaries and had worth.
Right.
So I just am like, let me tell you about all the trauma versus someone has to earn the right to be able to hear my story. So
I
when I'm
love that. Mm-hmm.
present in my date, that first date, the second, whatever that looks like, but I'm building up that self-esteem. I'm sitting in my discomfort. I'm being present and observing myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, my date's not asking me any questions. Oh, that person's a jerk. Okay, but how
Right.
come when the person's not asking you any questions, what is that about you? Oh, the person's not asking me questions. I feel not enough. I
Mm-hmm.
feel not worthy that they want to know about me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit versus, oh, that
Yeah.
guy was a jerk, or that person was a jerk, or that woman was just like, she couldn't get right. I don't care about the other person on the other side of the table from you. I care about
Mm-hmm.
you and being
Yeah.
able to be in that space early in sobriety or middle sobriety or long-term sobriety. It's all not easy. That's just been my,
Yeah. I love that. I love earning the whatever
right.
you had said, the right to hear my story. And because a lot of times I know if I come across some girls or otherwise and myself too, I used to just, say it all in one in the first 15, and then you hear other people do that and say, "Oh, wow, that was a lot of information to give someone they don't even know." And to guard that. And I think that's another step in self-respect, also self-restraint,
Mhm.
listening, and just self-esteem, where we're not anymore like connecting through like woundology, like we're not connecting our wounds, right? I think there's like Carolyn Miss or something. Um, anyway, it's just like that's not where we're living anymore. I'm listening to you, or we're present tensing it, right? And so you're starting new and you're building a new life, and you don't have to connect through your, hostilities and your survival kit and your like past mistakes, but you connecting in health in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to, again, I can't control the other person, right? I can only control myself, but I can say, like, okay, I'm going to have boundaries around this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to,
Mm-hmm.
I just can only speak for myself and say, like, when I was in those positions, and then I'm like oversharing, right? The easy word is oversharing. I'm oversharing all this stuff,
Sure.
because I have this false belief and false, but I thought it was real, but because I have this false sense of vulnerability and connection, the next thing that I know, and that's not a value statement or it's not a judgment, but with the next thing I know that I'm in their bedroom and doing adult things, and I just met him 2 hours earlier. Again, not a judgment, not a value statement. I'm just saying, like, for me, I did that over and over and over again because I felt that there was some attention. I had some value. There was some
Mm-hmm.
connection. And for
Yes.
me now, I don't look for that connection in other people's bedrooms or other people's beds. I look for that connection, that depth of connection with other
Mhm.
people, like in recovery or in the rooms or with the people that I work with. There's where I build connection. And those are much deeper connections than what I used to
Yes.
believe they look like.
Yes, yes. And that reminds me of a someone I had met once. She was a great girl, and I remember she was very just new to dating, and she went out with someone at night, and she had slept with him the first night. And I remember her coming over the next day, and she said, "Gosh, he hasn't called. He hasn't called." And then the next day, he hasn't called. He hasn't called. And I remember saying to her, well, he doesn't have to, like, because it already had happened. And she was like, wow, like she gave herself away that night, and it was like her first little piece of awareness that, wow, this can be a slow build.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't like, old me first time, right? Like she was just putting it together like, wow, he didn't have to call me back. Like, and when you say you earn the right to hear my personal story, you also earn the right to be in an intimate situation with me, which a lot of people maybe didn't come to the table with knowing, right? And so that's a learning curve and just another thing with self-respect and boundaries and self-esteem, what feels better, and yeah, it's really all great information so far. I really value having you on here talking about this, like candidly. And that's what I love about this podcast. A lot of times we talk about things that people just don't talk about, inside closed doors. And this is definitely an area that, as human beings, we're meant to be in a relationship and we're meant to be next to someone, right? And I know for me, I was like a lone, person for a while. Like I was self-sufficient to the utmost degree. And I remember my brother saying to me, like, you're like a truck, that has that beep, beep, beep. You just back it up when it gets too close, right? Or like a dog, he's eating out of his bowl and another dog comes up and he's like, he's just like, he's upset. He's like, get out of here, And he said, hey, we are meant to be in relation with people, because I think he wanted that for me. And it was just so unattainable because I was so stuck in my anger or whatever, because I was just so raw, in my relationship with myself and my relationship with the world at that time. And that's changed and it's been a big gift, and he was right. And so I think you bring that to the table. You give people the opportunity to grow relationships sober. So could you
Yeah.
tell us, a little bit more about what you do and how you help individuals and at what stage they have to be to contact you?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. The Sober Relationship Blueprint is the company that I founded, and it's directed at helping people create healthy, sober love relationships. And
Mhm.
the focus is on love relationships and romantic relationships, but it's actually all relationships, right? Because as I start to build, like you were talking earlier about self-worth or self-confidence, right? As I start to have a better relationship with myself, all of my relationships start to get better. My romantic relationships, family, all of those work relationships, they get better.
Yes.
So
Uh-huh.
Sober Relationship Blueprint helps single people in recovery from addictions, whether it's behavior addictions or chemical addiction, able to start to build those healthy, sober love relationships. And I wanted just to touch real quickly, two quick things, as I mentioned before, is that each letter of the word sober is an area of learning, right? So the S is self-esteem, the O is openness, B is boundaries, E is evolving into other intimacies besides sexual intimacy, and then the R is for readiness. So one of the things you were just talking about earlier regarding, the woman that you knew who became sexually intimate with someone is that I was that person all the time, because I didn't know there were other intimacies that I could build with people, not just romantic partners, but other intimacies. The E in sober is being able to evolve into other intimacies so that I can learn how to be emotionally intimate with someone. I can learn how to be intellectually intimate with someone. I can learn how to be spiritually intimate. And it doesn't have to be my romantic partner. It's just for me having to learn about those other intimacies. And then the R for readiness is being able to be ready to go out and do those things, have a sober dating plan. I work with people all the time on creating that sober dating plan, working on the profiles for the dating apps, making sure that it's the right balance of language to protect you as a person out there dating and to be able to be open to other new things as well. So Sober Relationship Blueprint is set up for that, is to help single people in sobriety from chemicals or from behavior. And you ask, where do they have to be? I would say optimally, this is not a hard fast. Optimally, as the phrasing goes, to be sober for at least a year. Because being able to start to do that rebuild out of old behaviors, but I can't mandatorily make somebody be sober for a year or more in the program, but that's optimally where somebody is going to be because they're going to get more out of it. And I have a free download. It's 5 quick tips for a healthy, sober love relationship. It's on my website, SOBER Relationship Blueprint, one word.com. So it's a pop-up and it's easy to find. It'll just be a pop-up, put your name, email address and their phone number, click it, you'll get the email with the download. It's really great. One of the things you mentioned earlier was about listening. Yeah, listening is one of the 5 quick tips to build a healthy, sober love relationship. I need to learn how to listen with discernment to become better. So, just different things like that. And I love doing what I do because I see the results immediately, and having people, men and women, be able to start to learn more about themselves and learn how to have healthy, sober love relationships using the Sober Relationship Blueprint that I've created.
Yeah. And you back it with life experience. And when you've walked through it yourself, who better to teach that. I also, there's 2 things that stuck out to me as we close. You do say love relationships, on your website. And that really caught my eye because, you can start because it's that's the focus, but then it also matriculates onto other relationships as well. I mean, this is a complete change. And then I love that the R is at the end for readiness because it's like a buildup, you do SOBER and then you're ready to go. So it's an exciting, I am ready to go do this, to walk into my new life, to walk into a new dating love relationship world, and I'm equipped. So I thank you so much for being here. I'm definitely going to have you back on to talk more. And I will put everything that she had just spoken about, Louie had just spoken about, website, her free download in the show notes. So please, I encourage listeners to visit and to grab that workbook.
Yeah, thank you. Love this. Thank you so much, Jessica, for allowing me the opportunity to be your guest on Sober.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, Louie. It was great.
Love it.
Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.